I couldn't help but feel like betrayed in some respect. I felt like misunderstood. Like I'm not doing a church planting residency so I could be a resident for the rest of my life. Like I don't want a timeless residency going on. This is not what I'm called to do.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, hey, we are excited to be here today with a real live actual church planter from the Portland, Oregon area. And it's always really fun to hear real life stories, to see what's possible when people come together to plant churches in a place. My name is Gabe Kolstad, and from Westside Community Church. I'm here with my friend Pete Armstrong from Park Lane Church across the city. And then we get the privilege of talking with Travis Weiss today. And we're going to hear a little bit about his experience and for good or for bad. And also kind of a little bit about how, like the group, kind of how the village has been a part of his experience. So Travis, welcome.
Hey, thanks. This is my first ever podcast. So,
right on.
Yeah, I retire, and if it sucks, it's not my fault.
Yeah, totally, dude. That's awesome.
Blame the co-host.
You, man. And Pete, it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, you too. It's great to be back. And Travis, his church is like right down the street from me. And, our podcast last week with Gary Brashears, man, Park Rose is getting a lot of love on the podcast lately. So
I'm talking about.
Cool. Love that. Well, Travis, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your ministry, and some of those kinds of things.
Yeah. I've been married for 24 years. It's been a big part of my life. We got married right out of high school. I got a 16-year-old boy, a 13-year-old boy, a 10-year-old boy, a 6-year-old boy. And it's 4, but sometimes it feels about like 20, everything is chaos. We fight all the time. And then we're best friends, everybody. So it's a pretty awesome household. Grew up playing music, loving church. So I have been playing music for my entire life. I'd say I'm good at the guitar and I'm good at playing vinyl. Those are my two main instruments. So, I approach kind of a lot of life like a musician. I love it's interesting how like church planting and being in a band really kind of coincide, some of the similarities, because I really do enjoy the creative, collaborative process in music, but sometimes it's painful and sometimes what comes out doesn't quite sound like you heard in your head, Yeah. But that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Love it.
Cool. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Roots Church, your church, and how it came about and its history. So it's 10 years old now, but tell us some of the highs and lows.
Yeah. September will be our 10-year anniversary. It's kind of odd to say that. I mean, because in some respects it feels like where's time gone? And sometimes I'm like, wow, it's only been 10 years. It feels like a lot longer, But we did take, I would say, a pretty slow on-ramp to get there. It was about a 5-year process for us to go from like the inception of like the dream. And Park Rose was really part of the dream for me. I'd been part of a church plant called The Well back in the early 2000s, right after I got married. Right after we got married, we joined this team, and it's kind of like church planting was an option, and we'd never heard about that before. And a mentor, the youth pastor, invited us in, and we're just like, yeah, we're in. Like, let's do this. And so you fast forward, a lot of the conversation back then was about being ready to plant other churches. And I think that was the seed that kind of grew into what became Roots Community Church out on the other side of the city. So, The Well is on basically on I-5. If you split Portland up into quadrants or whatever, or in thirds, there's the west side, then there's the east side, then there's East County. So I-5 kind of, is on the river, and then 205, and we're on the east side of 205. So, but yeah, it was a slow process. Actually, I kind of, if I could go back a little bit, the beginning of that process, in 2008, I was invited out to Croatia to lead worship at a missions conference where they brought all missionaries from the Balkans region into one spot. And I think God took me across the world, literally across the world, to hear my friend preach and say the words, God loves you so much, he wants to do more in you than what he may do through you. Like that's the one thing I remember of all the flying, of all the things I saw, all the people I met, of all the worship that was the thing. And I felt like that was like God had to have me out of my comfort and in this foreign place to hear this message. And, I just I was already praying about planting a church, but that was the moment where I think we said, well, let's go through the process. Let's just be faithful and see what doors open. So we went through assessment, and then, out of assessment, I don't know if you guys, you probably know about assessment centers, but it's 5 days of just diving deep. And so we walked out with some, recommendations. Some were difficult. Some were but all the stuff that were the recommendations, we were like, yeah, we want to do this regardless of if we ever plant a church. And the well stepped in right next to me, gave me a year to figure out some things, along the lines of my own boundaries. I read some books. I went through counseling, went through some, financial, just got some financial help as a young man, and as a young couple, we needed some assistance. And then we started a process. After a year of that, we went into what we called church planting residency, or church planting exposure. I think it often comes out of those church planters assessments, like, hey, you should get exposed to more church planting. Being a part of that first church plant isn't quite enough, or perhaps you would benefit by having more exposure. So, yeah, so that process, honestly, we weren't sure if we were going to plant or not, but we just wanted to enter that process, and that's how Roots basically started.
Wow. And now you get to look back on those 15 years since the Croatia time, and see what God has been doing in you. And I'm sure you've come back to that so many times.
Absolutely, man. It's been crazy. And, when we planted the well, we talked a lot about, I don't know if we use the words being pregnant, but always bringing someone along and mentoring along so that we could send, or that they could do our job so that we could go and plant. And as a musician, I was one of the worship guys. I never thought of myself as a lead planter. I would support, and yes, I totally, and maybe I would go join another team, but never felt like I would be the one to go. And so as the Lord began to speak and we began to obey and just be faithful, it was a crazy season of just I don't know, of radical obedience on my part. I'd never seen myself doing something like that. So to do it, and it's not been easy by any means. When we started with that kind of same ideal, it was idealistic, but hey, let's plant a church that plants other churches. And on paper, that looks awesome. I love it. I wrote a lot about it. And then we brought a guy in, and it was awesome. And he was great. And then 2 years after we planted, another guy came in who was like, hey, I want to learn. And we were like, well, we've got this system going on, but then we sent that first guy to plant a church, and it wasn't in our backyard. It wasn't across it was in another city. He moved, and it was a part of my just guts were torn out, because this guy had become just a best friend. He was part of the soil, of tilling the soil, of planting the seeds. And he was there from the beginning, all the highs and all the lows. And then just to send him out was more like sending out family than it was fulfilling a mission.
Yeah.
And, he's not dead or anything, but like he moved across. It's like, I don't see him all that often. We talk on the phone. I love him. And then that second guy moved across the country eventually as well. And you'd think that if you knew about it the first time, maybe the second time would be easier. And it's just not. You raise up your best and you send these guys, but I can't. I don't know. It's not for the faint of heart. It's definitely something that on paper looks good, but physically there's a cost. Yeah. So that was probably a low for me, I'd say, but a high at the same time.
Yeah. So I think it would be helpful to talk about the relationship. So when a worship pastor becomes a lead pastor, there can be a lot of challenges with that because, I've walked a similar path and, I've seen it go wrong in a number of ways. And I've also seen it go really well. But how are you involved with music at Roots today? And then how does you being a musician kind of impact the worship culture of the church?
Yeah. I got when I was doing the assessment, it was a weird assessment center for me. I don't know if we do this anymore because I'm involved in assessments now, but they had asked me to lead worship at my own assessment. So
Same with me. And they were like, wow, you did really well with that stuff. And then you got to work on all this stuff if you want to plant.
Right. I was like, but I can play guitar. Come on. This has been my golden ticket in all of life. And you're going to make me be responsible for all these other things and grow in purity and, wisdom but I play guitar. That one of the assessors asked me, why would you give up guitar? Why would you give up something like music that's so, culturally relevant to, and kind of rare, there's a rarity to this. Why would you give this up to plant a church? And in this moment of clarity, I looked at it and I was intimidated by this dude, but I said, well, why do you think I have to give it up? Why do I have to stop playing guitar? Why do I have to stop worshiping and leading worship and doing this thing that I'm passionate about? And he said, fair. And I was like, I think I just won. I picked up my lunch and I walked away. I don't know. I can't remember exactly what else happened, but I do remember that moment. And I think that's been, I know myself and I know my own limits. So if I'm leading worship and I'm preaching on a Sunday, I won't do either thing well.
Yeah.
So I really try to if I love to play my instruments and, be a part of the worship team. I grew up at a church where my lead pastor, I grew up at a gospel church. We played a lot of gospel music. And I would just remember my pastor was always playing. And so that's all I've ever known is to see him up on the organ or singing and so it's just kind of normal, for me. And I absolutely love it. It gives me life for sure. And I realized at one point, the same muscles that I was using to play music and to create musically, it's kind of like this. They're the same muscles that I use to create sermons, the only thing is when I learn a song, I'll play that one song a lot, sometimes, I know songs that I've been playing for 20 years that I learned as a young man and that are still, but you know how many times I've re-preached a sermon? I've never re-preached a sermon. Mm-hmm. So same muscles, but it's much more, it's in a time capsule,
muscles and different results.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of fast twitch muscle going on for sermon stuff, but it takes me a ton of time to get through stuff and then I read voice into everything. And every once in a while I think maybe I should just sing this sermon, but I've never done that.
You should try it.
So yeah, maybe I'll try it this Sunday. Come to Roots. I'm singing everything. So.
I'm kind of curious, Travis, you were getting started, it sounds like you had a pretty robust sort of entry into planting and all that. What was it like, the amount of support you had? How did that make you guys feel What was your support like, and how did it make you feel? Because I think there's so many unique stories. Yours is one there was kind of a lot of hands on this thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's interesting because, as I think about my story, I think about other people. I'm like, doesn't everyone have the same story as me? And it turns out like I'm so like self-centered that I just kind of imagine that everyone has done what I've done, But I do realize that what I was a part of in planting the well, was not normal for I'd say in the larger sense. It was normal in this. I think that when the well was planted, I think the church that we came out of was more like, go for it. We support you, but there was I don't think there was any like real lasting tie. And I think I'm being generous here as well. I don't want to talk bad about anyone or any of that history. But what the well experienced is like this, like kind of independent go do it. What I experienced was far more supportive. The first person who ever asked me about planting a church was actually one of the pastors at the well. Right? It was at my church. Like they were the ones who go, "Hey, Trev, have you ever thought of planting?" And my response was, "Absolutely not. I'm doing great. I love what I'm doing. Please, I don't know if they wanted to kick me out, but then a second guy asked me, one of the elders later, like a year later, said, "Trev, have you ever thought of planting?"
And you were on staff of the well at that time?
Yeah.
Cool.
So, I don't know how common that is for a church to look at like a significant leader, and especially someone as good looking as me. And, I'm talking about Gabe,
Absolutely, dude.
And then say like, "Yo, you should bounce. Like you should really think about, multiplying this." What's that?
I said getting out of here, but yeah, multiplying it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, that was, I think that's odd. I think it's beautiful. I think that it was a vote of confidence, and it was even in the whole idea of like go and explore this. The support was even in the exploration. Like, because if I came back and I said, "I'm out, I'm not going to do this," I think those guys would have been like, "Okay, cool. Okay, we just want you to be faithful, and we see it. And if it's not a thing, that's fine." And I think I went into assessment even like that, thinking like, I really don't have any expectations. Now, I think I want to plant, but if I'm told I can't, if I'm told like, "No, we don't think you have what it takes to plant," I think I would have been okay with that, because I had a gig. I was one of the pastors. I loved the church community that I was in. And if I wasn't there, I don't know where I would be. So it's not like there was this urgent, like I have to get out, or I'm so dissatisfied with where I'm at that I'll go plant a church and finally I'll do it way better because they don't do things right, and I'm going to go do things right. I didn't feel like that. I really felt like I want to multiply what I'd experienced. Like if I'm not, if I can, I ought to, in fact, because of that history. So that support, I don't know how common that is, but it was great for me. I mean, I felt super confident, I don't know if I already said it, but like a child, with grandparents, like I could do whatever I wanted, with my grandparents. My folks do not spoil me, never have, but with my boys, I mean, they give them whatever they want, whenever they want. And as a church planter in that sense, like I felt like incredibly supported, like if I needed financial help or advice or counsel, or even just like I need to vent, or I need to process something. I've never seen this before. Like all these guys were willing to step in. So like the well has been that for me, as well as Mosaic. So the well and Mosaic are not affiliated denominationally. They are affiliated through Christ. Amen. Like it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So Mosaic said, "Hey, we've got a landing spot for you if you want to come and join our team. You could become a resident church planter with us." And it's a big structure. It's a church it's really the Well and Mosaic are unlike each other in a lot of ways. So I could grow, the influence and the atmosphere helped me just like kind of see that there's a lot of different churches for a lot of different people. And, it wasn't just exclusively the way that I had been doing it all my life. And so stepping into that process was really good. And then a friend of mine named John Chang, Dominic Kahn, were planting a church called Missio on the west side. And John and I joined that team both of us as resident church planters at Mosaic. And so we were part of staff meetings together, and then we walk out and we began to dream together, write and pray and meet on the west side as Missio was being planted. So the support system for me in the assessment my assessment, they would said, hey, we think with all the things that you should do personally, kind of the capstone to your assessment would be go get more exposure to church planting and be on a church planting team. So I asked John, like, can I join with you guys? And for a year, I tilled the soil and planted seeds with them. And so I was kind of doing 3 different things, kind of juggling that. It was a little exhausting. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if the support system, but it was perfect for us, for my wife and I, and even for the team that was coming with me. I had a few folks that were like, hey, look, we're with you. And I was like, well, if you're with me, put on your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So doing all of that, I had responsibilities, but I think all of that responsibility was couched in like, just support and love. And the atmosphere, I'd say in Portland back then was a little bit like that too. Like Imago was actively planting churches, and Rick was a incredible resource, and their team at Imago. I remember meeting with guys on their team just to ask questions. And there was a church called Bread and Wine. Duke Rivard was in town. He was a few years ahead of me, and he became a coach for me. Northwest Church Planting or Thrive Church Planting. Micah Dodson was back then like a big resource and a coach for me. So just like I had resource on top of resource. And again, like I think, isn't this just how every church planter goes about planting a church? Isn't this the same for everyone? And
I mean, that's kind of what sparked my attention when we were hanging out earlier this summer. I was just listening to you talk about how things happened, and it's like, wait, that's how we dream about, things happening more often. Let's see that happen 1,000 more times in our city.
Yeah.
Because it's such a great expression of the body of Christ. So it sounds like there was a lot of upsides, which I'm sure not the least of which was all of this learning you're doing around seasoned leaders and that. But was there a downside to it?
No downside whatsoever. Everything was butterflies and popsicles. Next question. Things got really difficult. So in my collaborative mindset, you could say like how all this stuff, I could juggle these things and it was good. And I realized, I don't know if this is for everyone. I wouldn't necessarily recommend 3 gigs all at the same time. And I think everyone saw that eventually. In fact, during that time, we had a child, my second was born 10 weeks premature. And so I live on the east side and I was commuting all the way out to the west side. Well, Missio was planted on the west side. So I had like new family out there on the west side. So I think God had orchestrated all this, and was pressing me in some ways that I was growing. Yet I wasn't a great pastor at the Well. I wasn't a great, resident church planter at Mosaic. And I would say I probably wasn't the greatest co-planter at Missio either. Let alone husband or father and all of the things that, I was up to. And like we were raising funds at that moment. If you've ever done that, that's a stressor all unto itself. But what really happened is after a year of this, right? So I'm juggling these things and you think after a year, my residency is complete. And this is the point where I can finally like take a breath. I can peel away all these extra things and then move forward into what God has called me into. Right. And this has been part of the assessment and of doing the personal things. And so it's been a 2-year process up until that point. And then I got a call after I had begun writing what I called a prospectus. Do people still write prospectuses? Like just vision and mission. And I was, I spent like a month kind of just woodshedding, going on. I went to the beach and just wrote one day. It was incredible. Like just the things that I'd been reading, kind of synthesizing things I'd experienced and saying like, what's it going to look like for Roots to come out of this? Like, what's my vision? Well, I get a call, and I sit down with one of my friends and a mentor, and he says, after this year, and I know that you're ready to launch, but we all agree, meaning like the Well agrees with this, and Missio and Mosaic, we all think you ought to take an extra year. Actually, it wasn't just a year. Right. It was just like, we think you ought to we think you ought to pause, and we think you ought to like settle, peel away a few things and just do a single residency until you're ready. I was like, well, when will that be? We don't know. And I'm telling you, like all that family stuff kind of goes out the window, or maybe the family stuff kind of this is where, and I don't want to overdo it, but like, I couldn't help but feel like betrayed in some respect. I felt like misunderstood. Like I'm not doing a church planting residency so I could be a resident for the rest of my life. Like I don't want a timeless residency going on. This is not what I'm called to do. But so I don't know if I was just misunderstood or like maybe I was defensive or whatever. But I think in the end it smelled a little bit like betrayal, which I think is overstating it. Like nobody there is trying to betray me. It's like, oh, well, no, we want your church or something. Like, no, they weren't betraying me. They were showing me this is the ultimate love. This is a father talking to a son saying like, you ought to wait. Yeah. And the same guy who said, God loves you so much, he wants to do more in you than what he might do through you. He said to me, Trav, like you can go plant a church if you want to, like in some respects, you may be ready. He goes, but in all of my time, I have never had a church planter say to me, I wish I would have planted sooner. I have never heard anyone say, I should have pulled the trigger. He goes, well, I've heard plenty of people say, I wish I just would have taken more time. And my buddy John said the same thing. And he was in the middle of planting Missio, and he looked at me and goes, dude, this is a gift. He's like, if I had an extra year, I would take it in a second if I could go back, And I heard that. And I think I heard the Holy Spirit. Tim and I met, and, it wasn't easy, but I'd say that the Lord really gave me some clarity in that moment. And I was studying the book of Acts and just seeing how the church wasn't bound by, the persecution, even if I felt persecuted or whatever, like what the Lord was beginning and what the Lord was doing, what the Holy Spirit was moving in, like nothing could stop it. And so I thought, well, I'm not the primary player here. I think I ought to humble myself and slow down. And it was a huge moment in life for me because my wife and I decided like, and the team, like, let's take an extra year or let's take an extra time. Right. It wasn't even a year. And actually, ultimately, I think after it was about a year, or maybe even 9 months later, they all came together and said, hey, we think you're ready to go. And that was just so much sweeter, I think, even in that moment, and to have that extra year of growth. And it was a good moment. So yeah, really good connections, and then really terrible, yeah, I felt like a kid, like yelling at my mom, I hate you, And so
I think every church plant situation has some aspect of that moment right there.
Sure.
Yeah. But in the end, like it worked out really, really well. Like all the timing of that. And you've got that 11 years of history to think back on now. Yeah. I want to shift a little bit to talk about the context. So you mentioned earlier that the church plant is east of 82nd. And for people who are not from Portland or maybe aren't familiar with the history, it's really different. I mean, the area that the church is and we live and serve in, Travis, it was all like annexed in the 80s and 90s. And it's just way, way different. So people have weird lots and people have weird systems and a lot of people that have been here for a long time, they push back hard on the city of Portland, and it's just different out here. Mm-hmm. And you guys have those natural connections with the Portland Rescue Mission being right next door. Yeah. Shout out to Angie Armstrong, my mom, who was the development director that raised the money for that facility back in the late 90s. But so tell us a little bit about your parish, so to speak.
Yeah. I'd say one of the things that really helped develop us, like we started slow. We weren't in a rush. Again, I think that's one of the huge benefits of planting with this sort of support. I had deadlines, but they were mostly artificial. They were mostly things that I just felt like this is what we were called to do, but I have support. I think that could be dangerous. That could make you lazy. But in the same way, it could make you very confident and you can be kind of slow and steady and kind of stay the course. And so this call out to this gateway area began early in my church. Like I remember going to this organization called Northwest Church Planting. They had all these seminars and stuff. And I remember being in the room while church planters are talking about all of these things that they're doing. In fact, that was the first time I'd ever heard really someone talk about incarnation as something that we ought to do. Like we have to be like, here's Philippians 2. And we often like say like, here's Jesus, look at Jesus. And then it was like, no, like Paul's inviting the church into this process as well, to mimic and to follow Christ in incarnation. And so hearing those things and having that conviction and then having the support from those churches kind of drew us into this area. I had a friend who was leading worship at Shepherd's Door. So women and children, all kind of struggling with homelessness, but then addiction, arm of the Portland Rescue Mission. And I just said, hey, can I come and play guitar with you? And she was like, yeah. And it was crazy. I've never felt so uncomfortable, like I'm completely out of my element. Yet just feel like this is faithful, like this is me being faithful. Like if I can't serve here, then what am I doing in this area? Right. Mm-hmm. Like what am I doing planting a church if these ladies aren't invited into what we're doing? And I think, initially kind of thinking like we're doing a service for the mission and, look how we're helping you out. And then these ladies started to come to our initial meeting. So we met like weekly in a home or in a large room, and we began to pray and talk about our rhythms and who we are as a church. Well, all of a sudden, these ladies are not just guests. They're asking questions and they're developing the culture. They're beginning to say things and talk about things that I remember one time we were having a meeting and we were talking about the providence of God. And I asked the question, how do you see the providence of God in your life? And this lady goes, Trav, can I say something? I'm like, absolutely. And she says, I see the providence of God in jail. I went to jail. Mm-hmm. I was put in jail for drunk driving. And I see the providence that God brought me into jail so that I could come back to Shepherd's Door. She'd been there once before. And she goes, I got a hug from one of the ladies here and said, man, God must really love you. And that it brought me back here. I'm telling you, like, I'm talking about the providence of God. I'm like, man, can you imagine getting all green lights if you're in a hurry? Just the providence of God, my bill was $50 less than it was last year. The providence of God, and she goes, jail, the providence of God. And I was like, that's the depth I'm talking about. And that it changed me. That influenced me. That I began to go deeper into my faith because of that. And here's where I do believe that God loves you so much as a planter. He wants to do more in you than what he might do through you. I don't know what God's going to do through me, but I know what he's doing in me through the influence of these ladies. And so, that has been huge for us. And it's hard to maintain that because sometimes we'll start doing like church things and realize like there's people who have problems or addictions or whatever that we need to address and think through. But it's been good because that population and these ladies, are part of the conversation. The culture is kind of ingrained and been kind of, it's changed the recipe of what it means to be a church for us in a lot of ways. And it's helped us, as we've grown. We've always been, a 4 p.m. gathering, which it's weird. We've never owned our own space. In fact, we started, I would say, in the kitchen of people would ask me like, where do you guys meet? I'd say in the kitchen of a friend's kitchen, but it was at Shepherd's Door. We met in their dining room and, like it was big, and we'd set up some speakers, and then we moved to a building just north of that, a Lutheran church that invited us in. And again, the partnerships, like we're getting partnerships that we intend to have. And then this Lutheran church says, please come on in. And we're just blessed, low rent and just like run of the space. It's just like, wow, look at, here's the providence of God for us. Like we can't afford what we're doing. And then even over COVID, that church, space became unavailable. And then just down the road, like I'm talking literally at the end of the block, we now reside at a church called Gateway, and they've been incredibly generous to us. And we have such, like good fortune. Like it's either like, oh, look at how fortunate we are, or like, look at how the Lord has provided over and over again.
You know what's funny, Travis, not even thinking about this podcast or knowing this, but on Sunday we drove by on my 9-year-old son and I to go home. And, he was like, yeah, that's, those are our friends' church. That's Eva's church. And they have dinner every week, and it's not even a potluck. And I was like, yeah.
Well, we don't. We have a monthly meal together, but we do eat in our gospel communities. And it is a potluck, which is very dangerous for me because I grew up in church, and I'm like, yo, no casseroles. Like I'm an anti-casserole guy. Yeah. You have all these ladies or people saying like, hey, but you haven't tried my casserole. And I was like, no, tuna casserole.
And I'll shut down the neighborhood 4th grade rumor mill about
right.
People are talking, man. People are
talking, bro. That's awesome.
Love it.
Hey, Travis, you mentioned COVID, and I'm really curious in your situation with the length of time that your church had been going by the time COVID hit. Like, how did this all impact you? What did you guys do? What was your ministry like? And, how leadership challenges? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about that season for you guys?
Yeah. I'd say one of our big strengths being that we gather at a weird time. We've never owned our own building, and in some ways we've always been young, like we've always had young families. So there's this, I don't know if it's versatility, but like this flexibility that's required. And so, when COVID hit, I don't know. It was like it was just innate to be prepared for that. Like we had just people we have incredibly strong leadership for the size of church we are. Like I have no business with some of the guys that I lead. Like, I'm like, why am I leading you? Like, you should be the one in leadership. Just don't tell anybody. Like, this isn't going public, is it? Like,
no. Nobody's going to see this.
But like I've got guys around me and ladies who are just incredibly talented, ready to innovate and ready to change in any moment. And the church has a culture of that where it's like, hey, look, we're going to change gears. We're going to meet outside We're gonna go to the beach. We're gonna go camping. We're gonna do something else as a body. Which, you know, it's a great thing to have, that kind of flexibility. But I think it's because we don't have that Sunday morning kind of like that sacred space is unfilled by us, by our approach and by our calendar. So that strength of adaptability and flexibility, I think, really helped us navigate through COVID. You know, we did the online thing. I became what's a preacher called that's on TV?
Televangelist.
I became a televangelist. Like, I had to figure out the old lighting thing so that my bald head wouldn't, shine too bright.
Dude, tell me about it.
Oh,
even now I'm seeing this glisten happen.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but that made us so even we moved spaces during COVID, we bounced from a space that was incredible. We loved it. And it was good because the church was sad to see us go, but through the conversations, they were like, we understand, and we'll hold your spot for a little bit. But to come into this new space and, again, people were ready to innovate and ready to set up chairs and ready to, change things around, ready to open up their homes. And we did church in the backyard, for a while where we, we just spread out through the city and did things in our homes. And one of the things I really appreciated was the elders at Roots. We just said, hey, here's the two things I think that we want to maintain is, one being wise with all of these things. We don't know all the things that are happening. We don't know the impact of everything. You can read articles on both sides of the argument, whatever. But what is it like for us to exercise wisdom? And then on the flip side of that, what's it like for us to be faithful? So we may have to, the marriage of wisdom and faithful, action. What are we going to do during the season? And for the most part, we had good buy-in and people just kind of moving forward, together. We stayed close by Shepherd's Door for a lot of that season. They were on lockdown. They were unable to join us. And we had people unable or unwilling in some respect to join us as well, but came into this space and they have a big apple tree in the back. And so we did Roots under the tree for 3 or 4 months, and again, this bald head in the sun, it's not so great, but under a tree. And it was great. And to this day, we do Roots under the tree, because of the joy that it brought. We actually, we don't do it every week and we don't do it when it's 106 degrees. We go inside, you know what I'm saying? But it's beautiful. It's beautiful to have that sort of versatility and adaptability.
Yeah, man, I just hope that everybody who's watching or listening can catch on to something that you seem to do really intuitively, which is just to listen, just observe and respond. And I feel like, whatever that message was about incarnational that hit you early on,
yeah,
you really owned it, because it's so cool to see how you've allowed your environment, and the circumstances and the timing and kind of God's providence, in your words, to inform your ministry so much. And,
cool.
Don't you guys think that's what our city needs more and more and more of, is just those missionaries that are willing to go, I'm going to be in a space and I'm going to be the presence of Jesus. And we're going to build a team that does that. Man, that's just beautiful. Just listening to you talk. It's awesome.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Pete, you're up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we just got a couple more questions as we're kind of running out of time, but what's on the horizon for you, Travis? What are some of your hopes for your ministry in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, this 10-year anniversary, I don't know how to do that. I've never done one before. So having that be joyful and celebratory and, it's still fulfilling. What's it like to, just listen and obey. When it comes to being a disciple, we talk about it often in just those terms of just listening to the Lord, hearing what he says, and but that's not enough. Like listening is not enough. It's the obedience, and to have true obedience, you have to really be listening. So those things have to go together. And so when it comes to our 10-year anniversary, we're not going to, I want us to celebrate, but also be able to like say, what's it like for us to faithfully move forward for another 10 years? I don't know what that's going to look like. The other thing that we're doing, which I'm really excited about, one of the guys that talk about guys that I have no business like leading or pastoring, a good friend of mine, Dominic Abaria, just finished his doctoral studies over at Fox, and he's launching a ministry called Fermata Ministries, which is providing like spiritual direction and pastoral counseling and soul care. And it's just been incredible to watch him be faithful and just to lean into what the Lord's telling him to do. And so we're trying to, free up space and free up time and help him launch this out and be a resource to our body for sure, but also to the church in general. He spent a lot of time at the rescue mission. He was a chaplain downtown, and he studied, I think, essentially like burnout when it comes to spiritual direction and soul formation. Burnout was his primary like focus. So to see the fruit of that, say, hey, like let's care for the church and care for people. It's pretty cool to see that pop out. So yeah, I'd say that's on the horizon for us as well. So
that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if people want to catch up with what you're doing, or just hear you crack some jokes because you're really good at that, or maybe jump in and give you guys a high five in some way, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, Pink Bunny 2000 at yahoo.net.
That's my email address.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, just Travis Weiss at Gmail. Feel free to drop me a line. I'll let you buy me a coffee and listen to me talk some more if you want. Put some good time together.
Fascinating.
Can I give one last encouragement? I've always dreamed about this moment, like when if I ever had a soapbox and be able to share one thing. But if I could give my story in a synopsis, is that at one point when we started planting, and that moment of like, hey, we think you ought to stop. Up until that point, ministry was always fast, and as fast is fast. If I want to do something, I go and do it. If I want to create something, let's create it. Mm-hmm. If I want to initiate something, let's just go. Let's just go. And from that inertia, things would happen. And then if you want to slow things down, like just slow is slow. And that was always a critique. Well, they're just moving slow, but let's be fast. And that moment of like, hey, we think you ought to wait another year, in concert with that actual year, things slowed down for me huge. And I remember sitting with Duke Rivard, the guy who planted Bread and Wine, and he said, Trev, sometimes fast is slow. Sometimes when you hit these barriers and you hit these walls, like it's so frustrating. It's like you could move the same amount of distance wanting to go fast as wanting to go slow. Mm-hmm. You'll move the same amount of distance, but if you want to move faster in that time, that distance feels minuscule. That distance is frustrating. But if you're intending to go slow, you actually will see progress. And I think for me, if I could give a plug, or that's just like, I don't know if it's just an encouragement, or maybe this is your out. Like when you hear this, you go like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. But if planting is in your blood, my encouragement would be in a lot of ways to have this perspective that slow is actually smooth and smooth is fast. A buddy of mine in the military kind of said, hey, when we would take rooms in Afghanistan, we would say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I was like, well, I say that now about church planting. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marine Corps. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I just feel like that's an encouragement to church planters. It's also an encouragement to lead pastors who are, like, hey, how do we develop leadership? Like, don't be in a hurry. Don't be in a rush. And I basically said, there's no need to talk to me now because you've heard everything I have to say. But if you want any more, like, feel free to reach out, but I don't really have anything more to tell you. Other than my experience has been that moment of Duke saying that, like, slow, when you hear something, you kind of go, oh, that's me. It's now.
Yeah.
That's the Lord speaking to me. Like, I need to take this in. That was that for me, that's slowing down. That's spending the time, to really think about what the Lord's doing in me and then what he might do through me. But taking it one day at a time, one step at a time. So it's not for everybody. I know that some people want to plant churches and they go and plant churches and they grow, they explode. Like, by all means, do it, I don't think
sometimes they jump into the pool and they jump right back out of the pool.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah. So,
well, wise words, man. Even though I cringe just a little bit because this has always been my Achilles heel, of just like being willing to slow down. It feels so backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I just love the way you just said that.
Gabe, there's a great book called Slow Church that a guy from Central Oregon, John Pattison, wrote. But maybe Gabe can read that, Slow Church.
Okay, next on my list. Hey, thanks, guys. It's been awesome to hang with you this morning, and just really appreciate you sharing your story, Travis.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.